Hello my friends, today we are continuing with our editing breakdown of this image, the Undiscovered Country. So if you missed the first two parts of this tutorial, you may want to watch those so that you will be up to speed with where we are at, and you can find links to those in the description. Today we are going to create the reflective pool area here in the ground, and we are also going to add what I am referring to as the coral brain to our image. So first I would like to mention that I did do a little bit of additional editing to our shadow here. So it was stretching out a little too far towards the horizon line. So I brought it in, made it a little skinnier, and made it look more like it's in the foreground where it belongs. And I also did a little further blending of that shadow into the grass area here. So those are things that I did just using the exact same techniques that I already showed you in that last video. So the first thing I want to do for today is I want to remove this shadow here. So I'm going to zoom in. And the reason is that I think it's a little distracting. It may be coming from this bush, but I think it actually might be coming from something that's out of frame entirely, which is why it just seems kind of out of place here. So I'm going to hit J on my keyboard to get my spot healing brush, and this is the spot healing brush here. If you hit J, you're going to get your healing brush, and there's a bunch of tools within the healing brush family, I guess you could call it, but we want the spot healing brush. So it's the one that looks like it has like this little dotted half circle next to it. So I'm just going to use that to remove this shadow. It should do a pretty good job. And yeah, it definitely does a pretty good job of it. And I'll make it a little smaller. I think it kind of duplicated something I didn't want duplicated there. And kind of run it over that area. Oops. So sometimes you need to kind of go back and forth with it a little bit, but that's okay. If we just kind of slowly tap at this here, we will wind up with that shadow removed. And then if there's anything that looks kind of repetitive, I'll come back and get rid of that, but I think that's pretty good. So we're gonna hit Command 0 to fit this to the screen, and then I'm gonna hit Command minus to zoom back out. And I think that looks better. It was just a little distracting having that shadow in there. So now we are going to start adding our reflective pool. So I'm going to go up here to the head group, and I'm going to add a new layer on top of that, and we'll just call it opening. And I'm going to get my marquee tool. So I'm going to hit M for my marquee tool, but I don't want the rectangular marquee. I actually want the elliptical marquee. So I can come up here and select that. I can also hold Shift and hit M, and that will go back and forth between the rectangular and the elliptical marquee. And I want the feather on this to be 2 pixels, which is what it's already set to. And I'm just going to draw an elliptical shape here that is around about where I think I want this opening to be. We will be able to adjust this. So I'm just going to kind of roughly do this. Something like that to start is okay. And then we're going to go up here to select, transform selection. And first I'm just going to tap it up. So when you do that, you're basically able to transform your selection in the same way that you would transform an object. So I'm just tapping it up a little bit. I'm going to hold Shift and pull this down. And then I am going to pull it out, also holding Shift here, just a little further. Maybe still a little bit further. So I'm just kind of trying to get an idea of where I want it. And sometimes zooming out a little bit will help with that. So I think that's pretty good. I'm gonna pull it this way just a tiny bit more. Okay, so we're just gonna start with that and we can adjust it further if we decide we need to. So now I'm gonna hit Shift Delete and I'm going to want to use color because I want to choose a color here. Then I'm gonna get my eyedropper and just choose something from the darker shadowy areas in the ground here. I don't want it to be totally black. I just want it to be a very, very dark brown. So I'm actually gonna make it a little darker, maybe something like this, and then we'll click OK. And then we'll hit Command D to deselect. So now we have our opening. So the next thing that we need is the reflection that's going to be in the pool. And I'm actually just taking that directly from the sky because it's the sky that's going to be reflected here. So I'm going to go back to my background layer. I'm going to use my marquee tool again, but I want my rectangular marquee tool. So I'm going to hold Shift and hit M to get the rectangular marquee tool. I can leave the feather at 0 for this. And I'm just going to make a nice big selection of the sky here above this area that we have chosen. So something like this should be more than enough. And I'm going to hit Command C to copy that. I'm going to go back up here and hit Command V to paste it at the top. So now I am going to pull this down and position it over this area. So I'm going to hit V to get my move tool. And I'm going to hold Shift as I drag it so that it will come straight down. So we'll just put it somewhere right about there. And I'm going to turn this layer off. Let's actually name it also. We'll call it Sky Reflection. And let's turn it off. So we're going to go back to the opening layer and we're going to hold Command and click on that layer so that it will select the pixels in that layer. And then we're going to transform this selection again. So we'll go to Select, Transform Selection. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And I'm going to hold Shift and pull this point down just a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same on the sides here. So that it's now kind of a little bit inside that area. And I think that looks just fine. So we're going to turn our sky reflection back on. We're going to make sure we have that layer selected. And we're going to add this selection as a layer mask. And there we go. So now if we zoom out a little bit, we can see better. We have our sky reflected in our pool. And one last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to unlock the layer from the layer mask so that I can move this layer around without moving the mask. So I'm just going to drag, make sure that you have the layer and not the mask selected. So what I did just now is I moved the mask. So I want to make sure I'm on my layer. And I'm just going to drag this down a little more. And I think I like that position right there. Okay, so now I'm just going to group these layers. So I'm holding Shift and clicking on the opening layer. Then I'm hitting Command G to group them. And I'm going to call that Reflective Pool. And there we go. So let's zoom back in. And now it is time to add our coral. So I already have that image open right here. And we've already been over the selection process that I'm using in this image, so I'm not going to go over that again. So just like we did before when we were selecting the head, I would just go to Select Subject, or I would use the Quick Selection tool by hitting W or coming over here and selecting it, and just use that to drag out my selection. So one thing you may not know is that you can actually save selections. So let's just pretend like this is our selection here. We can go to Select, Save Selection, and give it a name. We'll just call it Test and click OK. And now we'll hit Command D to deselect that. And if we go to our Channels panel, now we have that selection as a channel in our channels panel, so we can always go back here and select that again. So I actually don't want to use that one, so I'm going to just delete that. So I'm just grabbing it and dragging it to the trash. I already have my coral selection here. So I'm going to hold Command and click on that so that it will select my coral. And now all I have to do is hit Command C to copy it, come back to my image and hit Command V to paste it. And now I am going to right click here and choose Convert to Smart Object, and we'll call this Coral. So let's go ahead and start moving it. So I'm gonna move it around about into the general area where I want it. And then I'm gonna hit Command T to transform it. So we just kind of have to play around with it until we get it into about the position we want and about the size that we want. In my mind, I'm thinking that it should seem like this could fit inside of the head. Maybe not exactly, but pretty close. So I'm gonna make it just a tiny bit smaller. So I'm gonna hit Command T again, make it just a little bit smaller. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. I think this is about where I'm wanting it. I think I'm gonna tap it back just a little bit. So I'm gonna hold Shift and hit my arrow key. I think that's pretty good. So let's go ahead and commit to this. Now I am gonna zoom in here really quick. And as you can see, there's not really a lot of what they call fringing on this object. So sometimes when you pull an object off of a background, it will have a color that sort of a halo around the outside of that object that you'll want to remove. But we're not really getting that here, so we don't really need to worry about that. So we're gonna just zoom back out. And I'm gonna go ahead and create the reflection here. So in order to do that, I'm going to hit Command J to copy my coral layer. Then on this copy, I'm actually just gonna rasterize that layer. So I'm gonna right click and choose Rasterize Layer. And we'll call it Coral Reflection. And then we are going to hit Command T, and we are going to right click and choose Flip Vertical. So that just completely flips it upside down. And now I'm going to actually drag this down into our reflective pool group. So then I'll hit V, and I'm going to hold Shift and pull this down to around about where I think I might want it positioned. So something like this. And then I am going to add this same layer mask that's on the sky reflection to the coral. So I'll hold Option and I will click and drag that up to the coral. And there we go. So I think that's looking pretty good. I might tap the reflection down just a tiny bit more. Maybe not quite so much. Okay, so I think something like this is looking pretty good. So that was actually a very simple process, as you can see. And now all we really have left to do is just to put the finishing touches on this image. So that's basically color and contrast and things like that. So I'm just going to take care of that and we will have our final product. And we are now finished with our image. The only other thing that I would typically do would be to just add a little bit of sharpening to the image. And that is it. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And I will see you next time.